What's up? What's up?
Could you help me play VM stuff? He wants to run Mac.
Does he have it installed?
Yeah.
Who is it? Who is it?
You'll still have to download the rest of the What's up, man? Is there a password on? Wait. Wait, sorry, I can't hear. What's up, man? Why not? All right, everyone. Let's get started on the actual application. So let's go ahead and everyone start off by opening up Xcode. So when you open up Xcode, you should be prompted with the screen, or just exit out and come back to this so we're all on the same page. You'll be presented with the screen. Once you're here, click on Create a New Xcode Project. It'll prompt you with this. Today, what we're going to be using is a single view application. There are other apps, and if you're using Xcode 9, you'll also notice new options like augmented reality app and different cool stuff, right? We'll be using single view app. We're working on a very basic app, of course. So use single view app. So this screen is just defining things about your app. So product name would literally be what you want to name your project. So I'm going to call this GG Calculator Live. And then you have your team and all that. Make sure the language you select is Swift. Do not select Objective-C. It'll be very awkward for everybody. All right, so go ahead and create it. And you should be presented with this. So this will just be a blank project. Let me increase the size of my font. All right, so once you're here, make sure you expand this little folder on the left side Let me actually increase the size of my cursor. All right, right over here on the left side, make sure you open up this folder. It'll be the name of your app. Okay, so let me just do a quick run through of these different files. So the first file is the app delegate. The app delegate defines different functions that run at different times of your application. The first one was did finish launching, application will resign, application did enter background. I'll let you infer when these functions run because they're in the name. This file for now is not very important. We might go over some stuff in the app delegate in future workshops, but for now, just know that it's here for you to use. The next thing is the view controller, but I've already talked about the view controller, so let's skip that for now. After that comes the storyboard. So main storyboard is where your actual app UI is going to be designed. So right now, of course, we haven't added anything, so it's just going to be a blank app. So if I go ahead and run it, and I'll be developing it on the iPhone 10 just for fun. So if you run it with one of the simulators, you can select whichever device you want. I recommend if you to use an iPhone 8 or iPhone 7 or iPhone 10 if you want to be adventurous. Or actually, it doesn't really matter. Just use something newer than an iPhone 7 or newer. So I've gone ahead and ran the app, and as you see, it's just a blank screen, just like the storyboard shows. So let's actually take a step back and continue going through the files and folders. The next thing is called assets.xc assets. So this is where you'll actually import your assets to use. So assets being things like images, sounds, your app icon image, all that. Right now, we don't really have any images to use, so you can ignore this for now. The next thing is the launch screen storyboard. How many of you guys know what a splash screen is? Just a few. Okay, whenever you launch an app, you might notice for a split second there's just an image of maybe their logo. Snapchat, I think, is just that ghost. Facebook, I think, is just like blue. But this is where you would create that. You would just create a simple splash screen that maybe has your app logo or something. This is more of a cosmetic thing, and it actually helps your app like transition nicely. So if you have a cool transition in here, it makes your app look like there's almost no loading time because it's instantaneously opens and then it goes to your actual application. So the last thing that that's important for today, well, not really important for today, but is the info.plist. So this is a property list file which actually defines different properties about your application. So if you want to bypass network restrictions, you would define it here. If you want to use a user's camera, you define it here. If you want to use the microphone, you define it here. Today we're not leveraging any of those features, so we're going to leave this file untouched as well. So for today, the two main things we'll be messing with is the main storyboard and the view controller. So let's go ahead and dive into the main storyboard. So just to show you guys what we're trying to build. So as you guys remember, we're trying to build this calculator. So what we're going to start off is by creating the UI. So make sure your Xcode is expanded. And if you don't have this right sidebar at the top right, make sure you click it so this appears. At the bottom, you'll notice there's this little thing. So this is a little library that actually houses different things like your medias like images and stuff. This is where the views are. You can also save snippets of code that you like to reuse. There's already snippets of code they've already given, and you'll notice that these aren't even Swift. These are actually C++, C, stuff like that. But later on, as you develop more and more, you'll start running into code that you continuously type. You can store that in here. And the last thing is, whenever you want to create a new type of file, you'll notice there's all the different files. You can just drag this into the folder and it creates one. But for us, what's important right now is the third one, the circle with the square in it, which is called the object library. So the object library is where you can get these different views from. So you'll notice that this app is pretty simple. There's a few labels that show what each of these boxes as well as this percentage holds, and then there's a button right here to actually do the calculation. So in Xcode, the view for showing text like that is called a label. So in the search box at the bottom right, just type in label. And you'll notice there's a label. You can go ahead and just drag this into your actual view. Your view controller scene, I mean. So that'll put in a label. So let's go ahead and run the app just to see what happened when we added it. You'll notice that that label that we put in there is already in our app. So now all we had to do is continue dragging in more labels to actually display what we need to, right? So this first one is current grade percentage. So let's type in current grade percentage. You might, okay, so you might notice that we need a lot of labels. A cool shortcut for actually copying them is if you hold Alt and you click and drag from an already created view, it'll copy it. So for those of you that want to save time and learn the cool shortcut, just do that. But of course, you can always drag it from here back into here. And we need one more label for the percentage. And then we need three text fields. All right, and text fields are used to input single lines of text. So, of course, right now we need 3 of them because we need one for the current grade, the weight of the final, as well as the goal grade that you want. So, let's go ahead and create 3 of them. And I'm going to put final weight percentage, goal grade percentage. Oh, what did percent say? And the grade we need. And for now, we'll just put in 100% just as a placeholder. So you guys might notice that these views are pretty cool because in Xcode, it actually lets you edit the properties as if it's a Word document. So you might notice at the right side, we have different things like font, color, alignment. We can what else can we do? We can shrink it. We can add shadows and cool stuff. For those of you that are more interested with UI stuff, this is really useful because it allows you to edit the different properties. So now that we have this basic UI defined, the last thing we need is a button. So as you might have guessed so far, you just type in button, if I can spell it, and just drag in a button. And let's go ahead and change that text to calculate. And there we go. All right, so now we have this basic UI design. So the next thing that we want to do, well, before we start our code, let's run it so we can see how it looks on the device right now. Yusuf, can you check if the temperature can be put down a bit? All right, you'll notice that our UI looks exactly like it does in the storyboard. We have a button, we have some text fields. Let's go ahead and type in there, all that fun stuff, and so on, right? Obviously, it doesn't do anything because we haven't coded any of the logic, but we have somewhat of an app. The next thing that we want to do is actually create references to these UI elements in our code so we can interact with them. So what we can do is, so that we can see both the code as well as the UI at the same time, at the top right, you might notice a button that looks like a Venn diagram. This opens up the assistant editor. And what the assistant editor does is it opens up files related to whatever is on the left side. So you'll notice that we're on this view controller scene, and it opens up the view controller file that defines the logic for that scene. So you'll notice right now right now it's pretty blank. There's no code actually written for it yet, but that's what we're going to be doing. So the first thing that we want to do is create references for these 3 boxes. The reason we want to create references for these 3 boxes is because when we actually type in the code, we type in values into it, we need to take those values out, right? So let's actually make these references. So to connect your these UI elements to your code and create what are called outlets, like I talked about in the presentation, you control, click, and drag from the UI element into your code. So where you usually want to define outlets is right below the class declaration and right above the first function, whatever it is. So the usual naming convention for this is to name it something something that you can identify it ending with the type that it is. So what I usually do is do something like C grade label. And you'll notice that the first word is always lowercase, and each consecutive word, the first letter is uppercase. This is what's called camel casing. So let's see if I add it to the code, if you can read that. Can everyone read the text over here fine? Anybody want it bigger? No? Okay. All right, so you'll notice that now we have an outlet right here. And if I go over this little gray circle right here, it'll highlight what it's connected to. So let's repeat the same thing with the other two. We'll name this F weight label. And then we'll name this G grade label. All right, and then the last thing we need is this one, which is the grade needed. So we'll add in the grade needed label. Oh, actually, we probably should have put fields, but we'll just use labels. But anyways, so now that we have these connected to our code, we can start interacting with them. So to test this out, you'll notice that right now the grade needed is at 100%. So inside your view did load, what we can do is when we get to this scene, we can change the text inside there. So let's test it out. So type in G needed label. So you'll notice Xcode's autocomplete automatically recognizes it's there, so saves you a lot of typing. And we want to edit the text inside of it. So dot text, and then set that equal to, let's do 99. We'll just do 99. Let's go ahead and run it. You'll notice that when we created the UI, we set it as 100. But when I actually run the app, let's go ahead and run the app. You'll notice that it's now 99 rather than 100 because we programmatically actually changed it. So remember this, because once we've actually calculated the grade that you need, we can just place it in there by doing the same exact thing, right? G needed label dot text equals whatever the grade they need. So the next thing is when we type in the values, so let me just type in some random values. And I click the button, nothing actually happens. So now we got to think in terms of our app. We want it to, whenever we click on the calculate button, we want it to calculate the grade you need and place it into that grade needed label. Does anybody know what we need to use to perform this? What we need to start off with? It was in the presentation. We've gone over outlets. It's not outlets. It's action. There we go. So what we're going to do is from the button, instead of connecting an outlet, let's add this to the bottom. It's easier if we add it to the bottom. Control click, and we'll get that little pop-up again. But instead of an outlet this time, click on the drop-down and then click action. And you'll notice it gives us a bit more options. You'll notice there's now an event where it says touch up inside. Touch up inside literally just means when you click on it. So let's name this on calculate. So since this is not an outlet and we're not referencing it, we're making an action occur. We'll name it in this kind of naming convention. So we do on calculate. You'll notice that it automatically generates a little function that we can kind of like play around with. So now let's delete the code that we put in view did load. And now instead in on calculate, let's say grade needed label dot text equals whatever number you want. It doesn't really matter. I'm gonna put 420 again. Did anybody recognize the pattern of numbers in the presentation? Nobody? No, it was 420. Gosh, you guys are all losers. But anyways, so when we start up the app, you'll notice that it's at 100% because this is what we actually created in the UI. But when I click on calculate, you'll notice it changes to 420. So now we've officially programmatically used the button to perform an action. So now all that needs to be done is performing simple math to actually calculate the grade that's needed. So to do this, we're gonna go into our action, but before we start off calculating the things, I want to demonstrate something to you. So whenever I click that button, yeah, I usually type in something before I click that button, right? So what happens if before I click the button, there's no actual text in one of the text fields? You'll notice that right now the text is actually empty and it's an optional. So does anybody know what we had to do with optionals? Unwrap it. Yay. Okay. So for each of these text fields, the text containing inside of it is actually optional because it's possible that can be nil, but from the way we've initialized it, you'll notice these outlets put the exclamation mark on them saying that these objects are there, but the text itself could be nil. But to be safe, we want to unwrap it. So let's go ahead and start unwrapping each of these text fields. So the first one we want to start off with is, let's do the current grade first. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the guard let statements. Because if we use if let statements, we'd have to do the first if let, and within that if statement, we'd have another if let, and then within that, we'd have another if let. So it would look something like if let, and blah, 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 if let, blah, 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 and so on, right? So now you get to actually see why guard let becomes a bit more efficient and makes your code much more clean. So go ahead and type in guard let. We're just going to call this C grade text is equal to C grade label dot text. Else, we're going to return. So we're saying if there's a nil text in there, we're just not going to continue the function because there's no point in doing it, right? Because there wouldn't be a grade to calculate. You would just crash your app. So alongside doing cgrade text dot equals cgrade label dot text, in Swift, you can actually define additional truth statements. So what we can do is after we've created cgrade dot text, we're going to do cgrade dot is empty. If this works. All right. So the reason I did comma cgrade dot text is empty. After we've created this, we also want to ensure that it's not nil, but it's also not just an empty string. For those of you that have done some programming, know that in Java at least, you can have a null string or you can have an empty string. The string is still there, but it just doesn't have a value in it. So if it doesn't have a value, it obviously doesn't have a number. So we also want to make sure that it has something in it. So we've checked to make sure it's not nil. We've checked to make sure it's not empty. And then we now have this variable called cgrade text. The next thing we want to do is now create a variable for the final weight. So we do the same exact thing. F weight text equals F weight label dot text, and we're going to do the same thing. F weight text dot is empty and we put the exclamation mark in front of it, by the way, because we're saying if it is empty, it returns true, but we want that to become false, so it triggers the else statement. And then we do else, we return here as well. So as you guys might have guessed by now, we also had to do this for the third text field. So we have you can just copy and paste it. We have G grade text equals G grade label dot text, and then we also do G grade text. I'll copy this into the Google Doc so it's a bit easier. I know this is quite a lot of new syntax. All right, so now that we've stored these variables, can anybody guess what kind of data type each of these variables have been stored as? Strings. So for those of you that are familiar with strings hold things like sentences or words. The issue is you can't do multiplication, addition, or anything with words or sentences, right? So the idea is we got to cast these into numbers. So to do that in Swift, all we got to do is this. So let's start off with the current grade. We do C grade. We'll just name it C grade. We'll say double, and then we put C grade text. And then we'll do one for the final weight and the same thing. So what we're doing is what's called casting. So casting says, hey, we have this string, but we know for sure that there's a number in it, so we're just going to convert it to this type. Swift takes care of it for you by doing this, by wrapping it in the double object. So let's go ahead and do the last thing for the goal grade equals double G grade text. All right. All right. And also another thing that my bad, everyone. All right, there we go. So you might notice something because we're casting it. Swift allows for even more safety. In most programming languages, usually when you cast something to an object that shouldn't be casted and you try to store it, it might crash. What Swift does is, since it's not sure whether or not this casting will work, it's stored all of these as optionals. So at this point, since you've already done enough optional unwrapping, we're going to be a bit unsafe, and we're going to assume that the user is always entering numbers. So does anybody know how to force an optional to not be an optional anymore? Exclamation mark. So we're going to put them after each of these. So you notice now they're just stored as regular doubles. They for sure have values. All right, so now that we have the values, it's as simple as just performing the calculations. I won't go too far. I won't go too deep into the calculations because this is just math and I really don't want to go over it. But the idea is we first calculate the unweighted grade. So let's make a variable that will hold the unweighted grade. And just like regular math, we can just perform regular math in programming. So we do, okay, so what we'll start off with is 100 minus our final weight. And then what we'll do is wrap these in parentheses, because what happens when you subtract the final weight from 100, it gives you how much the rest of the class is worth, right? And then what we can do is you divide that by 100 to give us a decimal value for it. Wrap everything in parentheses again, then multiply that by your current grade. So by doing this formula, this will give you your unweighted grade. For those, I hope most of you kind of get the general gist of what this is doing, but I'll copy this into the Google Doc once we've done a bit more of the calculations. So this simply calculates your unweighted grade. The next one that we're going to do is we're going to figure out the difference between the goal grade you want and your current grade. So let's call this let grade diff, and we'll say it's G grade minus your unweighted grade. So that'll give you the difference, how much more percentage in the class you need, right? Then the last thing that we need to do is just simply calculate the grade you need. So let G needed equals parentheses the difference in grade, so grade difference divided by how much the final is worth, right? Because pretend you need 10% more to get an A in the class, and your final is 20%. You need 50% on the final to get the A, right? So we do grade diff divided by final weight times 100, because we've been using decimals this whole time. So the last thing that we need to do is simply put this into our grade needed label. So does anybody remember how we did that? How we edit the text property of the grade label? Go ahead. Uh-huh.
But then instead of doing quotations, you just like equals grade needed. And then you pass it to a string.
Yeah, so close. The only thing that you need to do is, as we go to the grade needed label, right? We need to access its text property itself and then set it equal to that. But yeah, that's the general idea. And like he was saying, the reason we need the quotation marks and the parentheses and weird stuff is the text property is a string. What we have right now is a double, which is just a number. To put variables into strings, the syntax is this, and then we just type in G needed in here. So what this says is make a string with that variable in it. Another way you might be familiar with it is just putting quotations plus the number. There's different ways to do this, but this is one of the ways. I just like using this way. So there you go. So let's go ahead and actually run our calculator. And I'll actually copy this into the... All right. Let's go ahead and let's put our current grade as, we currently have a 90 in the class. The final is worth 20%. And our goal grade in the class is 90. So let's click calculate, and you'll notice it says 90. Which is correct, right? Is it? I'm not sure. Does anybody know? Is that true? I might just suck at math, you know. But yeah, so there you go. So the last thing that we really want to do is, I think what you want to do is add a percentage to the end, right? So go back to our code, and right here where we inserted the variable, just put space percentage, and that allows you to combine actual text with variables. And now we'll just have 90, 20, 90. And we'll have a percentage. I didn't make it big enough, so stretch that out. And I'll just get rid of the space. $90, $20, $90. All right, there you go, 90%. Go ahead. In a what? Yeah, so you'll notice it'll say 140%. So it does the calculations correctly, but yeah, the next thing would be, for fun, we're gonna have something display that says it's not possible, right? Well, is that something everyone wants to do? Okay, so if you remember in my example here, if I play it, when I entered in an unrealistic grade like you were talking about, just a simple label appears that says GG. So can anybody propose to me, without talking about the code, can anybody propose a way we can make that work? Go ahead.
We just create another label,
Mm-hmm.
and we just don't like type anything into the label. We use an if statement to see if G needed is greater than 100. Then we just do whatever variable text equals the string G.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be perfect. So let's go ahead and actually implement that. So let's go ahead and get a label. Let's drag this label to right above the button. And like he said, let's put nothing inside the label. But let's make sure to give it some size at least. Otherwise, it'll kind of suck. All right. So obviously, since we created a new label, we now need to make a new reference for it in our code. So let's go up here, Control, click, and drag, and we'll call this GG label. All right. And like he said, underneath here, all we had to do is perform a simple if statement. So we're going to say if G needed is more than 100, we're going to say GG label dot text equals GG. All right, let's go ahead and try it out. Does anybody have a specific value they want, or? All right, we'll put 90. The final is worth 20, and you want 100. You'll notice, bam, it says GG. But now let's pretend that our goal grade is realistic, 90. And I perform it again. Can anybody propose a way that we can get the GG to go away now that it's the correct grade? What did you say? And where would we put this if statement? Oh, do you okay. Down here, or? Yeah. Okay. Okay, else. So, okay, so we can just do an if statement, but let's just add it onto this so we don't have to type as much code. We're just gonna say else GG label dot text equals an empty string. There are also other ways to do this. In the example app that I showed you, I actually hid the label itself. So before I explain that, let's run it again. 100 GG. Now if we want 90, bam, it disappears. Perfect. There are also other ways to do this. I was going to mention if you have a label, you can actually start it off with the hidden property. There's a little checkbox you can click right there that says hidden, and it'll hide it. And then in your text, you can just say a GG label dot hidden equals false or GG label dot hidden equals true. It's really up to you how you want to implement it. But yeah, that is it for the calculator. Is anybody interested in possibly making the UI like line up better? How many of you guys are willing to stay? I don't want to waste people's time too long. Okay. Okay, we'll just skip that for now. But yeah, that concludes the workshop. Thank you everyone for coming, but I hope you enjoyed it and you got something out of it. Thank you.